I always wanted to serve on a jury.
I'm really super excited to be here, so I really appreciate you having me. I'm looking forward to it.
I want to give a big shout out to the 13th Jury Podcast and Brandi.
Yeah, I applaud you guys. Keep doing what you're doing.
And then I just look to the jury, and it's sort of like, look.
Hey, if you're bored of work, come pop in and say, hey, we'll have some coffee.
You are a ray of sunshine, and I love what you've done with your YouTube channel.
Good morning, jurors. Good morning. Happy Monday. It is so Monday. Sorry, I'm a couple minutes late. You can see from my soaking wet hair. I just jumped out of the shower, so we're a few minutes late, but that's okay. And there it goes. I don't know why. Of course. All right. It's back, but who knows for how long? Yeah, I have no idea. I don't know. I just work here. We'll see how it goes. I will just roll with it. I am glad to see y'all. I am glad you're here. I know that we have not been on a regular schedule this past week because this past week has been chaotic, to say the least. It has been wild. There's so much happening, and it has been very busy. And I am planning on doing the day. Look, I'm gonna go ahead and tell y'all right now. I'm a reader. I read court documents. I read especially court documents, because that's the only thing I really trust. I read a lot. So I will go ahead and tell you, I am going to say names wrong like 72% of the time. Jamie, member for 5 months. Happy anniversary. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen with you, so you can't hear the sound effects. I'll have to change that. It's our anniversary though, Jamie. So happy to have you here. 5 months. So happy to see you're okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I am okay. It has just been, there has been so much going on, but I have missed y'all. I really have. Sandra Oliver, I missed you too. Thank you so much. I really appreciate y'all. It has been a week. So I love how you did that percentage. Brandi is mathing. Yeah, I make it up. I made it up, and I'm going to stand by it, because I'm sure it's an educated guess. That's my percentage. But I will say names wrong. So I know that it is Dan Markel, but I will tell you that the majority of the time I will still say Markel, because I read on this for so long before I ever heard anybody else pronounce it. So in my mind, it has been Markel for so long that swapping over to Markel is incredibly difficult for me, and we'll work through it. So, but that trial is starting next week. This week, so that's going to be very busy for me, especially because trials are like obviously taxing anyway, but I plan on, because it's right down the road, I plan on going to the jury selection because I'm very interested in it. So I am, oh, Lucy's here. Hold on. Let me give y'all some Lucy Cam. Why is everything trying to update on me right now? This is not what I need, people. Not now. Go away. Go away. I don't want you. I want you. You behave. You start doing things. Let's see. Let's see if I can get Lucy Cam going. Settings. Let me see if I can get this little stinker on the screen. There we go. There's Miss Lucy Lou. She heard her name. Hi, Woos. Hi, Woos. She hears her name. She's like, excuse me, I'm trying to sleep. Did you call me? Did you talk to me? She pulled down all of her stuff earlier, so I have to go down there and clean all that. So a couple things. I am going to, first of all, before we even get going, I'm going to show the first in chat in just a minute because you all get to take your fancy seats. But before we even get going, I want to let y'all know that we have all been lied to. And I don't want you to find out the way that I found out, which is in the middle of the night on Twitter. So I'm going to show you something because I feel like everybody needs to know this. And it's very important. Kangaroos are not what we have been told at all. These cute little cuddly creatures, these are not kangaroo. Like, this is not what a kangaroo is. And I need y'all to know this because I found out in the middle of the night on Twitter, and I feel like my whole life is a lie. So I needed to address this before we even get started because I feel like this is information that I should have been told. It's like I just found out that Santa isn't real. Like, I have had, like, look, this is my idea of a kangaroo. Like, look at how, that's my idea of a kangaroo. Like, just a hopping around, like, look at him, just a hopping around, cute with his little ears and, his little happy. No, So I posted this on Twitter when I found out, look, this is terrible. Like, hold on, let me start. He's got the dog.
Look at my dog.
And now, like, dude's just, like, fighting him in a river for the dog. Like, look at this. That's a kangaroo. He's like, come at me, bro. That's a kangaroo. Not those cute little bounce around creatures that we're used to seeing. That's a kangaroo. Your whole life is a lie. And I hate to be the one to tell you, but I am here to expose the truth. That's a kangaroo. Look at that. So we'll all have nightmares together. But I found this out on Twitter, and I even posted, I was like, I feel like I've been lied to about what kangaroos are. I thought they were these sweet creatures with their little pouches, hopping around all happy. But no, dude looks like he smokes menthol cigarettes and benches at least 220. I didn't know. And I feel like that's important for us to share and deal with that together. No, the dog got away. So the dog got away. Dude just like went up and started boxing a kangaroo in the river. That's right up there with coleslaw wrestling at the biker bar. I'm just going to throw that out there right now. Like, that's right up there with wild things to do in your life. I wanted to expose the truth for y'all because I care about you and you deserve to know the truth. We all deserve to know the truth, and we've been lied to. Kangaroos, not cute and cuddly. Kangaroos, terrifying. The things that nightmares are made of. But that's okay. We're gonna get through it together. And before we do that, let me congratulate our first in the chat, getting the tailgate going. Oh, I would totally fight one if they had Lucy. Like, I would throw down. Same troll every time. Lisa. Congratulations. Congratulations to our first in the tailgate. I am so happy that y'all came, got this party started right, got us off on the right foot, got everything going. It's good to be back. He benches 400. That's more like it, honestly. That's more like it. Yeah. Top 3. I hope that I did not scare you so much with the truth about kangaroos that you didn't get to enjoy your intro music, because I'm glad that y'all are here and getting this party started right. All right. So here's what we have going on. Okay. Can we just all right, all right, look, I know that you keep coming back with all of your different accounts. It's a little bit like I've actually prayed for you, because it's really sad to have nothing better to do than to constantly create counts. And I don't know what your feet thing is. Like, you got a feet thing, which is okay. No judgment here. You do you, boo. But I'm a little bit concerned for your mental health, because to take all this time to constantly create new accounts to come at me, it's a little bit weird. So I'm just going to let you know, you can keep coming in. We'll keep blocking you. That's, like I said, you do you, boo. But I think you probably need to find a new hobby, because this is a little bit sad and pathetic. So maybe evaluate your life and what you're doing with your spare time, and let's think about that a little bit. So good luck to you. If you feel like you need to keep coming, if this is like your life's mission and this is what you need, we'll still keep whack-a-mole or whack-a-troll, you do you, boo. But it's a little bit pathetic at this point. So I hope that you find mental stability and clarity in your life, and good luck to you. All right, so let's talk about the next trial. I like all the complicated ones. It's the complicated ones that really just, like, that I love, because I love making sense of the complicated stuff, right? So this one is, and this one is one of the complicated ones, which is why I love it. This is one of those things, like, watching justice play out has been a very long process. This was actually in 2014 that the murder actually happened. Kathy needs to know about coleslaw wrestling. I won't out the member who partook in the coleslaw wrestling at the biker bar, but I won't out them, but it's something I had never heard of, and I learned so much from y'all. I really do learn so much from y'all. sometimes more than I anticipated. But that's okay. Apparently it's a thing. Google it. It's weird. It's weird. I mean, it's not weird. Like, look, you do you, boo. If that's your thing, coleslaw wrestling at a biker bar, I'm here for it. I actually want to Google and find out where it's happening, because this is probably the thing I've been the most excited to witness in person since the wrestling with the, at the Baptist church. That was on my top list of things that I really felt like I needed to witness firsthand, to experience that in life. And I think coleslaw wrestling at the biker bar has now possibly elevated above wrestling at the Baptist church. But we'll see. So if you look at the thumbnail, you can see, let me pull it up. Let's pull it up. All righty, exit out of this, start with this. All righty. That's a good point. Thunder Beach is in what, like 2 weeks or something, or a week and a half. Dang, this year is flying by. And look, Bike Week here is always, it's always some good people watching. Yeah, Baptist wrestling. So they had, they have apparently, and it's in Florida, because of course it's in Florida. They have wrestling at the Baptist church, and all of us wine moms wanted to like take a field trip and go watch it, because who wouldn't want to, right? Oh, again with the foot fetish troll, like I pray for you to find more meaning in your life. Like, this is it is so sad. So sad. All right. So the trial that we are starting is a little bit interesting, complicated, drawn out. Which, those are all of the things that I get into the most with all of these. So the FSU law professor, this is Dan Markel. Like I said, I'm going to say it wrong because I got so used to saying Markel for so long before I actually heard anything. I was just reading. So he is an FSU law professor. This is his ex-wife, Wendy. This is her brother, Charlie, who is going to be the one on trial. This is his former girlfriend, and this is her baby daddy. And this is, he's in the Latin Kings. So they are said to have been hired by Wendy and Wendy's family to kill Dan. Like they got it, like it was, the divorce got dirty and there were, all kinds of battles happening. So Wendy has never, like they said that they did not have enough evidence against her to pursue, to put her on trial, pursue charges. So she, was, even though they were saying like, she is the one that hired them. Catherine, or Katie, I think she goes by Katie, is said to have been the link between them, because she, is former girlfriend of Charlie, who's the brother of, see what I mean? It's not like Karen Reed people complicated, but it's getting up there. So, whatever. But let me go over some of, let's see. There are, and And that's our thumbnail for the thing, if you want to take a look. So let's talk a little bit, because we're going to watch some of what I wanted to do today is opening statements of previous trial, kind of give you, because I mean, look, opening statements are kind of what lay out everything, for the, like what's to come. It's, it's not presenting you the evidence, but it's kind of telling you like what you're going to hear. The whole family is involved, in my opinion. This has been kind of like the general consensus of this trial, is that the whole family is involved. So, and there's a lot for it. So we'll go over some of it. Lady in Gray, member for 5 months. Has it been 5 months? Wow. So glad to see you all back. Brandi, working hard as usual. Thanks for all you do. By the way, pandas will eat your face. Pandas will not. They will fall before they get to you. They're so cute and clumsy. Lady in Gray, happy 5 months. I'm so glad to have you here. I love pandas. I love pandas. I love them so much. And they're just so, 80s, I see you. I see you're not lurking. You're not sneaking. I see you. I love pandas. Pandas are something I didn't know that I loved as much as I love them until that one day where we did the choose your own adventure, and we ended up going on like the field trip where we were just like looking at all these different live cams. I loved that day. That was such a chill, fun day. We need to do that again sometime. Maybe we'll do that for a little bit this week at some point. But we saw the live panda cam, and I was like, oh goodness gracious, they are like chubby and clumsy, and so am I, and I love it. Like they're like my spirit animals, and I just fell in love with them, and I like didn't even realize how much I love them until I saw them on the channel. But with every new thing I learn about animals with y'all, like I realized how much I love pandas. I also realized that kangaroos have been a lie. So, I mean, there's good and bad that comes with this learning channel, but they won't eat your face. They're too clumsy. They can't reach you. Oh, they're so cute. I love them. Happy anniversary. We're glad to have you. All right, so let's go over a little bit of the trial. Let's see. The trial it's in Tallahassee, which is not far from me, which is why I want to go to the jury selection, because I plan on streaming the trial, but also because I want to see the process of jury selection. I've never sat in on it. And I want to see it so that I have, like I've heard about it, but I've never actually seen it myself. And I want to see it myself so that I can have a better understanding of it. And since I'm going to stream the trial, then I'll be like, I'll know the makeup of the jury and can, have more insight into that too, which will be interesting. But I am, as of now, life has been crazy lately, but as of now, my plan is to go next week. However, what that means is this week will be a little bit lighter on streams because it's going to be very hectic next week. And also I have to get, since I'm planning on being, being away from home next week, working on or watching that, I have to get podcast episodes out beforehand and stuff or get them ready beforehand, stuff like that. So we'll probably have a pretty chill week this week, going over some of this stuff and different things. But next week we'll be back full force with everything. But this week's just going to be a little bit lighter on streams because of that reason. All right. So, let's see. So he is, all right. So like I said, Dan was an FSU law professor. Charlie, here, let's look at Charlie. I'm going to show y'all we're going to watch the openings, but I want to show y'all, let's see. Here, let me share this with you. So Rivera is serving time for, this is an older one, but he was serving time for unrelated charges. He is known as King Tato, and he was serving time in federal prison for his involvement in the Latin Kings. And according to Department of Justice, he was arrested for taking part in a, quote, violent racketeering conspiracy. So, so that's one of them. All right. So Garcia is linked to Wendy's brother. Court documents have linked Adelson to linked Adelson's family to Garcia. Wendy Adelson's brother, Charlie Adelson, Charlie Adelson's former girlfriend, is the mother of Garcia's children. So that's like the little flow chart thing I showed y'all earlier about kind of who's who and how it's kind of weird and complicated or whatever. But that's who that is. Both face death penalty and convicted. This is already gone. Both have entered not guilty pleas. So all three of them are in prison. Charlie is the last one to oh, Lucy has left the building. Charlie is the last one to stand trial. So I am I'm going to pull up. Let's see. The opening statements. Nothing gives you a better idea of the oops. Oh, maybe it's over here. All right, so we're going to do Catherine's visit. Catherine's opening statements. I don't know what I just did. Oh, there we go. All right. All right. They're hammering below me. Can y'all hear that? Or does my stuff filter it out enough? Not sure. Okay. Y'all have some very interesting zoo stories. I don't know what I've missed, but I don't know if I need to hear or want to hear the zoo stories. All right, let's see. Jury or judge. All right, let's see. Let's skip to
first, and Ms. Kappelman. Oh, Ms. Dugan, you may proceed.
Here, let me boost this. Oh no, what happened to my... Oh, kind of problems this morning. There we go. All right, here we go.
A rule of procedure has been invoked called the rule of sequestration. That means that all witnesses that are intended to testify at the trial will remain outside the courtroom until it is witnesses or anything. We're ready to proceed to opening statements. And Ms. Kappelman, is the state ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
And is the defense ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Dugan, you may proceed.
Good morning, y'all.
Thank you for being here today. Judge, I think we might have a question.
Like they don't have a choice.
Yes. Well, is the question anything substantive, or are you having a problem hearing, or?
Yeah.
Okay, do you need something done, or do you need to be closer to the speaker?
Apparently my Bluetooth did not disconnect from my phone, and so I can hear
You're hearing some feedback?
I just need to
Turn off your phone?
turn off my phone.
Okay. Deputy, if you could take the juror back to turn off his phone, that'll be fine. You can just go back and turn off your phone. Just let us know when you're ready and come back out.
I'm pinning it so that we. Oops. Pin message. Okay. Hello, those of y'all coming in.
The reason we're here this morning is because the defendant in this case, Catherine McBanois, set up the murder of a man named Dan Markel. And the evidence in this case will prove to you that the defendant was the link or the middleman between the people who wanted this murder done and the person who pulled the trigger. This murder was set into motion because back in 2014, the defendant had a rich boyfriend named Charlie Adelson. And Charlie Adelson's family had a big problem. And that problem was Dan Markel. And the solution to the problem was this defendant. This defendant was the solution because she had connections to the type of people who were willing and capable of pointing a gun at a stranger, someone they'd never met, and pulling the trigger. The victim in this case, Dan Markel, was known as Danny to his friends and his family. He was a loving father to 2 little boys at the time of his death. He was a highly respected law professor at Florida State University, and he was shot twice in the head in broad daylight in the driveway of his home in the Benton Hills neighborhood here in Tallahassee.
This was last year.
The last day of Dan Markel's life began like any other of his days that summer. He woke up, he dropped his 2 young sons off at preschool, and then he drove to the gym to work out. After finishing his workout, he returned home, he pulled in the driveway, and he opened his garage. But little did he know that throughout his normal routine that morning, he was being followed. He was being followed by 2 hired hitmen who traveled all the way to Tallahassee from Miami for the sole purpose of murdering him. And when he pulled into his driveway that morning after his workout, the killers pulled in right behind him. Moments later, Dan Markel's neighbor heard a gunshot. He looked out the window, and the neighbor saw a light-colored Prius back quickly out of Dan Markel's driveway and speed off towards Benton Road. The neighbor, waited a couple minutes and looked outside to see if Dan Markel was gonna come outside or back down the driveway too or what. And he didn't see anything. So he, got a funny feeling, walks over there to see what's going on, and he discovers a gruesome scene. He sees that Dan Markel's car window, his driver's side window, is shattered. He sees that Dan Markel is still behind the wheel, and he's alive but unresponsive and terribly injured. He calls 911, and law enforcement arrives. They find Dan Markel unresponsive too. He's got a gunshot wound to the head, and he's taken to the hospital where he survived for about 14 hours before he was pronounced dead. And Dan Markel was just 41 years old when he died. Law enforcement immediately begins to investigate.
The ex-wife's brother.
Killed Dan Markel. They learn of a couple of clues that immediately set them down these 2 different paths in this investigation. The first path relates to Dan Markel's personal life, and the second path relates to that light-colored Prius that the neighbors saw fleeing from the crime scene. And the evidence will show that both of these paths led to this defendant. So let's talk about the first path. In looking into Dan Markel's personal life, at who might have a motive to want him dead, law enforcement learned that Markel was entangled in a very nasty divorce with his ex-wife, who was named Wendy Adelson. A review of the court case file revealed that Wendy Adelson was desperate to move back to Miami with her children in order to be closer to her parents. Her parents are named Harvey and Donna Adelson, and also her brother, who lives down there too. His name is Charlie Adelson. And you may remember that name from earlier. Charlie Adelson was the rich boyfriend of the defendant. Dan Markel was adamantly opposed to his children being relocated to Miami. He's a law professor here in Tallahassee. He wants his kids here with him. And the judge ended up ruling in his favor, in Dan Markel's favor. So Wendy was not permitted to move to Miami with the children. Unless, of course, something happened to Dan Markel. A review of Wendy Adelson's emails revealed that her mother, Donna Adelson, hated Dan Markel and was desperate to find a way for Wendy and her children, Donna Adelson's grandchildren, to be able to relocate to Miami, even if that meant having to threaten, bully, or bribe Dan Markel to accomplish this. Although the divorce between Dan Markel and Wendy Adelson was final about a year before the murder, but litigation continued throughout that year, right up until his death, with both sides alleging violations of the custody agreement, violations of the settlement agreement. And actually, shortly before the murder, Dan Markel alleged that Donna Adelson was disparaging him to his children. And he actually asked the court to enter an order preventing Donna Adelson from having unsupervised contact with his children, her grandchildren. But the murder of Dan Markel ensured that a ruling on this motion would never be a problem. And just days after the murder, Wendy Adelson and the little boys relocated to Miami within walking distance of the Adelson family's Miami home. Dan Markel's son's last name was changed from Markel to Adelson. And just like that, their father was effectively erased from their lives. And the Adelson family's big problem had been resolved. You'll hear during this trial that the Adelsons are a very tight-knit family. Wendy and her parents, and her brother Charlie, are all extremely close. Harvey Adelson and Donna Adelson and Charlie Adelson actually all work together at the Adelson Institute, which is the family's dental practice in Miami. And Charlie is especially close with his mother, Donna. The two of them talk every day on the phone for long periods of time. And Donna is very involved in Wendy Adelson and Charlie Adelson's lives. After Dan Markel was killed, law enforcement interviewed Wendy Adelson, and she acknowledged that her family did have a motive to want Dan Markel dead. She said that her brother, Charlie Adelson, had actually made comments that he looked into hiring a hitman to kill Dan Markel as a divorce present to her, but decided to buy her a TV instead because that was cheaper. So this path of looking into a motive in Dan Markel's personal life of who would want to kill him leads law enforcement to Charlie Adelson, a man who looked into hiring a hitman to kill him. And then Dan Markel was killed by a hitman. And who was Charlie Adelson's girlfriend at the time of this murder? It was this defendant, Catherine McBanois. And the fact that she was his girlfriend at the time becomes significant when you hear where the other path of this investigation led. The other path began when the neighbor saw that Prius pulling out of the driveway, fleeing from the crime scene. So simultaneously, as police are investigating any motive in Dan Markel's personal life, the police are always also trying to track down that Prius. They've got to track down that Prius. And when law enforcement retraced Dan Markel's steps that morning on the day of his death, they uncovered some chilling surveillance images of that Prius, just like the one seen by the neighbor, following Dan Markel into the Premier Gym parking lot, waiting for an hour for him in the parking lot while he was inside working out, and then following him back home from Premier Gym to Benton Hills. And these surveillance images, coupled with cell phone records gathered in this case, help police track down the exact car used to commit this crime. And they were able to identify both of the hitmen who rented that car and the woman who hired them to do the killing, this defendant. Finding the hitman and this defendant, though, was not a simple task. And you'll hear a lot about that during this trial. This was done through a painstaking review of surveillance images, cell phone records, SunPass toll records that took a long time. It was a monumental task. And law enforcement combed through all of the cell phone numbers communicating with the cell tower that services Premier Gym around the time that that Prius was seen in the parking lot. And law enforcement found a number with a Miami area code. And that number belonged to a man named Sigfredo Garcia, who is the father of the defendant's children. Law enforcement examined all of Garcia's call logs, and they saw that he was in frequent contact with another number that was also present at Premier Gym that day when the Prius was there. And that number belongs to a man named Luis Rivera. Luis Rivera is a Miami Latin King gang member, and he is a lifelong friend of Sigfredo Garcia. So police then look at all of Garcia and Rivera's phone records, and it shows that they left Miami on July 16th of 2014. They arrived in Tallahassee on the day of the murder on July 18th. They followed Dan Markel to Premier Gym. It shows their phones both being powered down, turned off just minutes before the murder, and they stayed off until after the murder. The phones then came on again around Gainesville as the two were headed southbound back to Miami, and an ATM camera caught both of them in the Prius on the return trip down to Miami. So now police know the identity of the two men responsible for following and killing Dan Markel, but they continue to look for evidence to explain why two men who live in Miami came all the way to Tallahassee to kill a man they'd never met. What or who is the connection between the killers and Dan Markel? Phone records revealed that one of Garcia's most frequent contacts in his cell phone was the defendant. As I said, Garcia and the defendant shared children in common together, and they also have a long history of an on-again, off-again relationship. And the defendant, they saw, is also a frequent contact in Charlie Adelson's phone records, the man who once joked about hiring a hitman to kill Markel. And law enforcement, as I said, learned that the defendant was dating Charlie Adelson at the time that Dan Markel was murdered. So the defendant's boyfriend was looking to hire a hitman, and her children's father was the hitman who killed Dan Markel. So not only did the path of law enforcement looking into the motive in this crime lead to the defendant because she was dating Charlie Adelson. But looking into the car fleeing the scene also led law enforcement to the defendant through her relationship with Garcia. So both of these paths in this investigation ended with the defendant. 2 investigations and 1 conclusion. Law enforcement then reviewed bank records, employment records, DHS-MV records of all the suspects and saw that in the months after the homicide, Sigfredo Garcia, Luis Rivera, and this defendant all acquired some big ticket items. Rivera and Garcia both bought motorcycles and cars. The defendant got a breast augmentation surgery and later got a black Lexus sedan whose previous owner was Harvey Adelson. The defendant's bank records were analyzed and there was no check ever written or matching cash withdrawal for the car or the breast augmentation. Also, about 2 months after this murder, the defendant was added to the payroll at the Adelson Institute. She began receiving regular checks from their business account, although no one has been able to determine what, if anything, she did for the dental practice. She never physically went there to work. She never made any calls on the Adelson's behalf that law enforcement was ever able to find. And the other employees of the Adelson Institute confirmed that she did not work there. Bank records showed that the defendant's account had a huge cash spike shortly after this murder. You'll learn that she deposited more money into her account in the 5 weeks after this murder than in the entire year before. And this was during a time where there was no record of her being employed. In the year following the murder, she deposited 3 times as much cash as she did in the year before the murder. So the investigation that developed from the crime scene led to the defendant through the relationship with the shooter. The investigation that led from looking into the motive in his private life led to the defendant through her relationship with Charlie Adelson. And the financial evidence implicated the defendant as a beneficiary of a large amount of cash and some gifts after the murder. But the police also noticed something else. They noticed a distinct pattern in the phone activity surrounding important events or dates in this case. The phone calls always went from Donna Adelson to Charlie Adelson, then from Charlie Adelson to this defendant, and then from this defendant to Sigfredo Garcia, and then back the other way. Donna Adelson never contacted the defendant. Charlie Adelson never contacted Sigfredo Garcia. Could it be that the Adelsons were insulating themselves from the killers, the people who pulled the trigger, by having this defendant act as a middleman to set up this murder? Law enforcement decided to launch an undercover operation to clarify who the members of this conspiracy were and how information traveled within the conspiracy. Police were able to get court authorization to go up on a wiretap, and they listened in real time to the phone calls between the defendant and Charlie Adelson. But at that point, almost 2 years had gone by since the murder. All the members of the conspiracy had gone on with their lives, believing they'd gotten away with this. The defendant and Charlie Adelson are still in communication, but they are no longer dating, and they hadn't been in a relationship for about 1.5 years. The defendant is actually back together with Sigfredo Garcia at this point, kind of on again, off again. At this point, they're back together. And Charlie Adelson has moved on and had many other girlfriends since the defendant. And Rivera, at that time, was actually in federal prison doing time on another charge unrelated to this murder. As part of the undercover operation, the police needed some event that would generate conversation between the conspirators of this murder. And the plan was to send an undercover agent posing as somebody on behalf of Luis Rivera, who was incarcerated, And they wanted him to send the undercover agent. They wanted the undercover agent to walk up to Donna Adelson on the street and try to extort money out of her. So the undercover agent walks up to Donna Adelson outside of Adelson Institute. He hands her a piece of paper, and the piece of paper has an article on it about the murder of Dan Markel. And it has a phone number, and it has the amount of $5,000. And the undercover agent tells Donna Adelson that he knows that the Adelsons are taking care of Catherine McBanois and Sigfredo Garcia, and that Rivera wants more money to even things out. Because if y'all will remember, the defendant is still on the Adelson Institute payroll. She stays on the payroll from about 2 months after the murder all the way up to May 2016. And she's continuing to get money from the Adelsons, while Rivera just got the one-time payment for murder. So that's what the undercover agent says. He wants more money to even things out, Rivera does. Then law enforcement listens to see what will happen next. Will Donna Adelson call Garcia or Rivera? Will she call the police? Or will she confirm the pattern that law enforcement initially observed and call Charlie Adelson? And then, if so, will
She's
Charlie
talk slow.
Adelson call the defendant or somebody else? And then who will that person call? As suspected, based on the previously observed communication pattern, the first person that Donna Adelson calls is Charlie Adelson. And one would think that the first thing one would think that the first thing Donna Adelson would say is, you know, the craziest thing happened today. Some man approached me on the street, handed me an article about Danny being murdered, and is demanding money from us. But she never says that. She never says Dan Markel's name. Instead, she tells Charlie Adelson that she needs to talk to him in person about some paperwork that was delivered to her that involves the two of us, and that he should know what she's talking about. Donna Adelson says, this TV is probably about $5,000. Donna Adelson tells Charlie Adelson that the man who approached her mentioned an ex-girlfriend. Donna Adelson never says which ex-girlfriend. She never says Catherine McBanois' name to Charlie Adelson in that phone call. She only says that the blackmailer mentioned an ex-girlfriend. Charlie Adelson never asked whose ex-girlfriend or which ex-girlfriend.
Donna's the mom.
He never asked that. After this phone call with his mother, Charlie Adelson then calls the defendant. He does not call his
Charlie and
ex-girlfriend,
the ex-wife.
or even the ex-girlfriend before that. No, he calls this defendant. And his call to Catherine McBanois is the only call he makes to an ex-girlfriend after getting this information from his mother. And he had not dated Catherine McBanois for 1.5 years at this point. He never calls any other ex-girlfriend and never talks to anyone else about the man approaching his mom and trying to blackmail her, except for his family and this defendant, Catherine McBanois. He never calls the police to report that his mother has been extorted, and he never calls Garcia or Rivera. You all will hear the calls between Charlie Adelson and the defendant, and as you listen to these, you'll notice that the two of them are being very careful about what they say. It's apparent that people involved in this conspiracy are very smart, and they are immediately suspicious that the other could be wearing a wire, or law enforcement could be listening to these conversations. So next, Charlie Adelson and the defendant met in person at a restaurant called Dolce Vita. And while they sat at their table in this busy, noisy restaurant, an undercover FBI agent sat at a table nearby. And the agent had a camera, a hidden camera, and recorded the conversation. Their conversation can be very difficult to hear at times. Experts have tried to clarify the recording as much as possible and have succeeded in taking out most of the background noise, but the defendant was speaking very softly and her voice is still extremely difficult to hear. However, Charlie Adelson's voice is deeper, it's lower, it's a little louder, and it can be heard. And in the recording, we hear him discussing with her whether the man who walked up to his mother could be an undercover police officer or someone trying to blackmail them? And if it's a blackmailer, is it just somebody trying to make a quick buck, or is it somebody who knows information? And you'll hear on the recording that Charlie Adelson reassures the defendant that if it's the police, that's a good thing. Charlie Adelson thinks that if it's the police, that means the police don't have enough evidence.
Overruled.
That means the police don't have enough evidence to charge anyone. In fact, Charlie Adelson tells her, if they had any evidence, we would have already gone to the airport. He starts giving her some legal advice. He says, in order to prove someone committed a crime, you have to be able to put the person at the scene at the time the crime was committed, which unfortunately for the defendant and Charlie Adelson is not an accurate statement of the law, as you'll see in the jury instructions. It's important to note that, at the time that this conversation is taking place, no arrests had been made at this point of Garcia, Rivera, or of anyone. The only thing that the police had released to the public at that point was a photo of the Prius that was seen fleeing the scene. And it was the Prius that Garcia and Rivera had rented and used the day of Dan Markel's murder. So the only thing police had ever put out there is a photo of the Prius. Police knew at this point that Garcia and Rivera had rented the Prius, but the public didn't know that. The public only had a photo. And
real quick, they're talking, she's mentioning Donna Adelson. That's so Charlie, the one whose trial we're watching next week, and Wendy, the ex-wife, that's their mom. And it was only a few days ago where they had an update where the judge is ordering the Donna and what's his name? Harvey, I think. Harvey Adelson, like they're having to come do a deposition or whatever, or come talk to the court. The state had filed a motion to asking the judge to hold them in contempt of court because they weren't complying with the subpoena. So the judge has ordered them to have to come answer questions.
Here, Charlie Adelson give the defendant several analogies about rental cars being used to commit crimes in this recording. He reassures her that if her DNA is found in a car, all that means is at one point she sat in a car. And that if that car was later used to commit a crime, police can't prove that just from her DNA being in a car. Charlie Adelson says that if a rental car is found that was at the scene of a crime, police also have to prove who was driving it at the time of the crime. And he gives her a very interesting hypothetical of her renting a car in Miami, someone asking to borrow it, driving to Orlando to commit a robbery, and how she would be innocent in that hypothetical because she wasn't in the car at the time of the robbery. So you all will be able to listen to these conversations and decide for yourselves whether Charlie Adelson was trying to reassure the defendant that, even if police are able to identify who rented that Prius that police had put out to the public as a photo of the car fleeing the scene, they still wouldn't have enough evidence to hold anybody responsible for the murder. Charlie Adelson continues to reassure the defendant about the lack of evidence. He let her know that, basically as long as they stay quiet, they don't have anything to worry about. And he does that by explaining to her that crimes are tough to prove unless someone actually witnessed the suspect commit a crime, or a suspect makes a confession, or a suspect is caught on a wire talking about the crime. And at one point, Charlie Adelson points out that, the money hasn't been used to buy anything flashy that would draw the attention of police. Charlie Adelson does this by asking her, let me ask you a question. When everybody was there the next day, and then he asked her about the money, and then he says, it's not like you're driving around in a Bentley or cruising around in a mega yacht. And you all will hear during the course of this trial why those statements are important, why the question about the money and the next day is particularly important. Because the evidence will show that the defendant traveled to Charlie Adelson's residence the night of the murder. She picked up payment for the murder, the $100,000, and delivered payment to Garcia and Rivera the next day, the day after the murder. When discussing the possibility of whether there is actually a gangster here trying to blackmail his family, Charlie Adelson says, whoever this person is knows information. Charlie Adelson says there are two ways of dealing with this guy. They could call the police. They could do that. But then the guy blackmailing them would be charged with trying to blackmail his family. And the blackmailer would start talking. And he would start calling out the defendant's name. And then police are going to be asking questions about what happened. The other option is to pay him. but let him know that this is a one-time thing and try to scare off the blackmailer by saying, if you come around again, we're going to go to the police. So Charlie Adelson gives the defendant very precise instructions to call the number that the blackmailer gave them with the article of Dan Markel and tell the blackmailer, my friends, meaning the Adelson family, my friends have no idea what you're talking about. And I don't have any idea what you're talking about either. But the name of the person who's incarcerated, that name you said, does sound familiar. So I'm going to give you the money as charity to help the less fortunate. But don't contact these people again or they will go to the police. And Charlie Adelson said he would give the defendant $5,000 to pay off the blackmailer. Charlie is concerned throughout this conversation that this guy is not going to go away, that he's going to keep coming back for more and more money. And Charlie Adelson starts to let the defendant know what Sigfredo Garcia needs to do. Charlie Adelson lets the defendant know that he is willing to pay whatever it takes for this guy to be killed. Charlie Adelson tells her that this guy is, and excuse my language, but I'm going to say what Charlie Adelson said in the recording. This guy is fucking with Sigfredo Garcia's wife, meaning the defendant. He's fucking with him, and you better kill him or he's going to be a big problem. He knows who you are. Charlie Adelson says, if he can't do it, have someone else do it. Charlie Adelson says, so help me God, if they fuck with my family, it's going to be Nazi shit because this will be done. I mean, Katie, I don't care what I spend. During this conversation, Charlie Adelson never says Sigfredo Garcia's name. He only refers to him as he and his. But the evidence will show that Charlie Adelson was talking about Sigfredo Garcia here, and that's what he wanted Sigfredo Garcia to do. Because next, Charlie Adelson checks with the defendant to make sure that Garcia has no hard feelings towards him, no reason that he wouldn't do this. He says, I have you on salary. You think he'd be happy about that? He says, our paths never crossed. I wasn't in the picture when you and him were together. Meaning Charlie Adelson didn't think he and Katie's relationship had any overlap with Catherine McBanwell.
Overruled.
With Catherine McBanwell and Garcia's relationship. After hearing that Charlie Adelson wants someone killed and is willing to pay whatever it takes to get it done, you can't hear much of what the defendant says, but you can tell that her tone doesn't change. She doesn't yell, whoa, whoa, what? She doesn't hop up from the table and get up and run out of the restaurant.
Overruled.
She doesn't hop up from the table and get up and run out of the restaurant. Instead, the defendant then asks Charlie Adelson, she says, help me out. And Charlie Adelson says he doesn't have to tell her the things that he'll do for her. He shows her what he does. She doesn't have to ask him for anything. He looks for things to do for her. He helps out when it's somebody's birthday. He helps her with her car problems. She doesn't have to ask. He looks for ways to help her. And throughout Charlie Adelson's conversation with the defendant, Charlie Adelson would catch himself saying something a little incriminating, like at one point he says, why would this guy go to my mom? Why not go to me? That makes me think they only know part of the story. But then immediately says, but of course I had nothing to do with this. I don't know anything about this. Because he was very paranoid that the police could possibly be listening to these conversations, which was a valid concern because they were. What you won't hear in this recording is any explanation by Charlie Adelson to the defendant of why the police would be running an undercover operation on his family, or why someone would be blackmailing his family. Charlie Adelson never has to explain that to the defendant, even though it seems like that would be the first thing that an innocent person would want to know, and that we would hear an explanation for that. After meeting with this defendant, Charlie Adelson calls Donna Adelson to let her know that everything is fine. The defendant then asks Sigfredo Garcia to call the number from the paperwork. And you'll hear a number of calls between the defendant and Sigfredo Garcia, and one in particular where she voices concern because what the blackmailer has said is getting too detailed. You'll have an opportunity, as I said, to hear these calls from this undercover operation. And when you listen to these calls, you'll see how, first of all, how information flows from Donna Adelson to Charlie Adelson, from Charlie Adelson to the defendant, from the defendant to Sigfredo Garcia. And in these calls, you'll hear the parties talking, and they're going to be using words like TV and false leads, listings, properties, clients, relationship advice, patients, board of dentistry,
FSU
different
professor.
terms that are normal terms, but they're used in context that if you're listening to the conversation, don't really make sense. And you all are going to determine the facts in this case. And you can decide whether these suspects are actually talking about being blackmailed, or whether they're actually talking about TVs and relationship advice and real estate deals, or whether they're actually talking about being blackmailed or investigated by the police and are talking in this code in case law enforcement may be listening. Throughout these calls, Donna Adelson, Charlie Adelson, the defendant, they're all hopeful that this guy, this blackmailer, is actually law enforcement just trying to get information. They think that if it's law enforcement, that means that the police don't have enough to bring charges. They're just trying to get information. They're just doing a fishing expedition. Versus the other possibility, which would be much worse for them, that the Adelsons and the defendant are being blackmailed by someone who actually knows information about their roles in the murder of Dan Markel and may tell police what they know. So after this undercover operation, Luis Rivera and Sigfredo Garcia are arrested. They're charged with the murder of Dan Markel. Luis Rivera ended up cutting a deal with the state to provide information about the murder of Dan Markel and the people responsible for it. Rivera told law enforcement that he was hired by Sigfredo Garcia to help kill Dan Markel. Rivera described how Sigfredo Garcia told him that this defendant, Catherine May-Benoit, had set up a job for them in Tallahassee, and it was going to pay $100,000, with Rivera's cut being $35,000. Rivera told law enforcement that the job was to kill a guy to help the Adelson family, specifically Wendy Adelson, get her kids back. Rivera explained that he and Garcia, he's telling law enforcement this, he and Garcia actually made 2 trips to Tallahassee with the intent of killing Dan Markel. The first one was a month before the murder, in June of 2014. And the second one was when Dan Markel was ultimately killed in July of 2014. Rivera said that for the June trip, he bought a gun off the street, Garcia rented the car, and they drove to Tallahassee. They did some scouting on Dan Markel's residence while they were here, but they ultimately could not get the job done that trip, and they ended up going back to Miami. Rivera said he asked Garcia, who knows that I'm with you? Who knows we're up here doing this? And Garcia assured him that only the defendant knows. During the first trip to Tallahassee, Garcia showed Rivera a piece of paper with a picture of the man that they were hired to kill. And Rivera overheard phone calls between Garcia and this defendant during the trip, which included the defendant instructing him what needed to be done and saying things like, make sure you do everything right. Don't do anything stupid, and call me when you're done. After hearing this, law enforcement began to further investigate, and they looked for evidence that could corroborate what Luis Rivera was saying. They checked to see whether these calls took place, whether the meetings took place. Luis Rivera also told them lots of kind of small details about their time in Tallahassee, and law enforcement looked for evidence to corroborate that as well. First, police checked these cell phone records. They saw evidence that corroborated Rivera's information about the June trip. In fact, cell phone locations showed that the defendant helped Sigfredo Garcia rent the car for their June trip to Tallahassee, and showed that the defendant and Sigfredo Garcia were in communication throughout the June trip. On the second and final trip to Tallahassee, which was in July of 2014, Luis Rivera says that the two returned to Tallahassee, this time in that rented Prius. Rivera says that he and Garcia followed Professor Markel to the daycare, waited for him outside the gym, followed him home. Garcia got out, shot Dan Markel, hopped back in the car, and Rivera drove away. And I mentioned earlier that the evidence showed that both men had their phones off around the time, turned them off when they were leaving Premiere, kept them off until after the murder, once they were already southbound back to Miami. And Rivera said that that was the case, and that the first call, though, that either of them made after the homicide was once they turned their phones back on, and it was from Garcia to the defendant. And in that call, Garcia said the job was done. She said, I know. And Garcia asked about the money. And the defendant said, don't worry about the money. I'll get the money. You'll get it tomorrow. Law enforcement checked the cell phone records and locations and saw evidence that, again, corroborated what Rivera was saying. The defendant was in communication with Garcia throughout the July trip to Tallahassee. Sigfredo Garcia did, in fact, turn his phone off the morning of Dan Markel's murder, turned it off again while they were near Gainesville on the way back. And the first call that he made once he turned his phone back on after the murder was to the defendant. Luis Rivera told police that the next day, meaning the day after the murder of Dan Markel, money was delivered to him by Garcia and the defendant, and that the money was packaged in a very unusual way. The money was in stacks of $100 bills that were stapled together. And when police looked at the cell phone evidence, the record showed that the defendant did, in fact, drive from Charlie Adelson's home down to Rivera's home that morning, the day after the murder, which would be consistent with her getting the cash from Charlie Adelson and taking it to Rivera's home. The defendant repeatedly tried to call Sigfredo Garcia that morning to get in touch with him. And she and Luis Rivera actually called each other a few times that morning too, which you'll see was very unusual. And then the calls between all these parties abruptly stopped when their cell phone locations are all consistent with being at Rivera's place, which is where Rivera said they all met that morning and he received the stapled money. During this trial, you'll hear that Charlie Adelson had a very unusual practice of keeping his cash in stacks of $100 bills that were stapled together.
Stapled?
And when you
Who
consider
staples money?
the defendant delivered the money to Garcia and Rivera the day after Dan Markel's murder, that next day, Charlie Adelson's question to her about the next day when everybody was there in the Dolce Vita recording makes a lot more sense. Please pay close attention to all of the evidence that y'all see and hear during this trial, and you will see that the defendant is the connection, the link, the middleman between the people who came to Tallahassee to commit this murder and the person or people who were willing to pay to have Dan Markel killed. This defendant's decision to what would benefit her in the short term took the life of a brilliant father of two little boys and caused a lifetime of loss for his loved ones. And at the end of this trial, you'll be convinced beyond any reasonable doubt that this defendant is guilty. It is not reasonable to believe that she did not commit these crimes, given all of the evidence that you will hear and see in this case. She's guilty of hiring Garcia and Rivera to come to Tallahassee and murder Dan Markel on Charlie Adelson's behalf. She's guilty of conspiring with Charlie Adelson and Garcia to commit this murder, and she's guilty as a principal of the first-degree murder of Dan Markel. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dugan. Ms. Kawaz?
Thank you.
All right. Defense is up.
Good morning, everybody. May it please the court, opposing counsel, members of this jury. This is the first opportunity that I have had to speak with you directly, so I wanted to take a brief moment to reintroduce myself to you. My name is Tara Kawas, and I, along with Christopher Zicoles, have the privilege and honor of representing Catherine McManua in this case. Now, I want to be clear from the very beginning, because the state and I can actually agree on two very important points about this case. Number one, Charles Adelson had Dan Markel killed. We absolutely agree with that. Number two, Luis Rivera and Sigfredo Garcia carried out the hit for Charlie Adelson. We agree with that too. What we do not agree on is whether or not Catherine McManua knew about a plan to have Dan Markel killed. That's the only thing we don't agree on. Now, we don't have a burden in this case. I know you guys remember, because we went over this over and over and over again in jury selection, that we don't have a burden and the burden completely rests on the state. But Mr. DeCoste and I are going to have to do something very different in this case. We are going to prove to you beyond any doubt that Charles Adelson conspired directly with Sigfredo Garcia behind Katie's back to have Dan Markel killed. The only question that you are all going to have to answer at the end of all of this evidence is, did Catherine know? That's it. It's that simple. Because according to the law and common sense, and I'm sure the state will get up here and agree with me as well too, if she did not know, she is not guilty on all three counts. It's that simple. They won't disagree with what I just told you, because that's the law. Now, with that said, let's talk about how it is that we ended up in a courtroom where an innocent mother of two children is being accused of a crime she had absolutely nothing to do with. Now, before we start, I want to make sure that everyone has their notepads and pens. Yes, everyone has it? Perfect, okay? Because I am going to be encouraging you to take notes in this case throughout the course of this trial, because the mountains of evidence you are going to need to listen to the specifics, because the evidence of her innocence is in the details. There are thousands upon thousands of communications in this case. There are call detail records, phone records over the course of years. There's wiretap recordings. over 400 of them. There's even a secret, covert, undercover FBI operation that Ms. Dugan went into great detail about. The state even used the media in this case, as you heard her say, to selectively release certain information to the public, all the while listening to Ms. McDaniel's phone to see if she would say something that would incriminate her, even a little bit. But with all those recordings,
Thank you, Nurse for God.
hours and hours of surveillance, you will see that every single action she took, every word that came out of her mouth actually proves to you that she had no idea what was going on. The only evidence that the state is going to present to you in this courtroom from that witness stand that has direct evidence that Ms. McDaniel is guilty are the words of the convicted Latin King gang member murderer, Luis Rivera. But members of the jury, as we talked about in jury selection yesterday, this is precisely why all of you are sitting here today. The final word isn't up to the state. The final word isn't up to the judge. It is up to all of you. Each one of you, 14 members of this community who have been selected because you promised you can look at this case, look at the evidence objectively, and leave all of your preconceived notions about this case at the door. That is precisely what it is that we are asking you to do, to look at the evidence, their evidence that they gave to us. Because that's the problem with this case, members of the jury. This is how we ended up here with an innocent woman being charged with a crime she didn't commit. You will see that the state has been pushing their theory that she's the go-between for the past 8 years. That's a very, very long time to be married to a theory. It was longer than the time that Wendy Adelson was married to Dan Markel. But at the end of this, members of the jury, you are going to see that the only people who involved Miss McDaniel in this homicide was the FBI and the police. That wiretap, undercover, covert operation that they did, the moment that they said her name, they planted her in the middle of a case investigation. Had they not said her name, all of the conversations would have been completely different and we wouldn't be here today. Now I am going to tell you this morning, and to anybody who's listening and watching, how and when Charles Adelson conspired directly with Sigfredo Garcia to have Dan Markel killed. A little over 10 years ago, Wendy Adelson, a young law student at the University of Miami, met a Harvard lawyer by the name of Daniel Markel. Now, Miami is Wendy's hometown. That's where she was born. That is where she grew up. That is where her family is. And as the state said, 100% agree. She has a very tight-knit family. She does have two brothers. One's Robert and the other one is Charles. She is the baby of the family. And Donna and Harvey, her parents, ran a dental practice in South Florida. Her brother Charles was also a dentist. Now, from the outside looking in, you would have thought that Wendy Adelson and Dan Markel were a match made in heaven. A young, beautiful couple, both well-educated lawyers who came together by, yes, meeting on a dating app. And at some point, Dan Markel, he applied for a teaching job at the University of Miami where Wendy lived. But unfortunately, he wasn't offered the position. He was offered a position at the law school right here in Tallahassee at the prestigious Florida State University College of Law. It is one of the top ranking law schools in Florida. Now, Tallahassee is a picture-perfect place for a young couple to start a family. A vast difference from the fast-paced Miami that Wendy was used to and apparently loved very much. This is a world that Wendy grew up in. But after graduating from UM, Wendy and Dan had to move to Tallahassee for the job. And this is where they started their family. They ended up having two small boys who were not only the apple of their parents' eyes, they were the apple of their grandparents' eyes. One thing that everyone can agree on in this courtroom, Dan Markel lived his life for those boys. He adored being a father. And every single person that knew him that is going to take that stand will tell you how much he adored being a father and he loved those boys. Another thing you are going to hear over and over again is that Wendy's family has a very strange dynamic. They are very overprotective of her. They are extremely involved in every aspect of her life, including her marriage to Dan Markel. In 2012, Wendy decided that she no longer wanted to be married to Dan. And so when Dan Markel was on a business trip, she packed up her things and her children and headed to South Florida. She left the divorce papers on a mattress in the house. That is what Dan Markel had to come home to after his business trip. Furniture, gone. Clothes, gone. Wife, gone. Boys, gone. One swoop, she had taken everything away from him. But if she thought that Dan Markel was going to give up on being a father, she had another thing coming. Dan Markel was a brilliant legal scholar, so he did what he did best. He took it to court. And even though the legal battle was grueling at times, he was successful. in getting the court to order that Wendy come back to the only home that those boys knew, Tallahassee, so that they could be close to their father. Wendy and her family were not happy. And so the legal battle dragged on and it started to get nasty. In early 2014, the legal battle took a turn. Dan Markel moved the court to prohibit Donna Adelson from having unsupervised contact with her grandsons, and that she couldn't be alone with them. That is what Dan Markel was requesting. This put Donna Adelson into a state. And less than 3 weeks before the matter was to be decided before a judge, he was murdered in cold blood in his driveway in broad daylight after coming home from the gym. Within hours of this murder, the Tallahassee Police Department already had the name and the motive of the person who was behind this, Charles Adelson. And who gave them their first lead? None other than his sister, Wendy Adelson, when she tells detective, oh, yes, my brother made a comment once as a joke that it was cheaper to hire a hitman as a divorce present. I looked into hiring a hitman, but it was cheaper to buy you this TV. This is what Wendy Adelson is telling detectives within hours of Dan Markel being shot. She sat with them for hours. It's all recorded. There's video of the whole thing. Now, the rest of the family, Donna, Harvey, and Charlie, were all in Miami at the time. Wendy was the only one that was in Tallahassee. Now, you've heard a lot about this man, Charlie Adelson. Okay, you're going to be hearing a lot about him throughout the course of this trial. Let me tell you a little bit about Charlie Adelson. He was Wendy's older, single, perpetual bachelor brother. That's who Charles Adelson was. Interesting character, to say the least. At the time, he was in his late 30s, living his best life in Miami. Works during the day, plays at night. No responsibilities, no wife, no kids. And that's how he liked it. He had a modest house in Fort Lauderdale, but then he's the guy that would go and buy and drive a Ferrari. That's the kind of guy that he is. He also had other toys he liked to play with, a boat, a go-kart, and an endless amount of young, beautiful women for him to manipulate and play with. Because that's what women are to Charles Adelson, just toys. And the one toy that he ended up playing with is Catherine McDaniel. Now, Catherine, she always gets lost in the shuffle, and I want everyone to please remember that she is the reason we're here today. The name of the case is State of Florida versus Catherine McDaniel, and I do not want her to get lost in the shuffle of this mess of a case. She is a woman that sits before you today charged by the state with first-degree premeditated murder. And the only reason she is sitting here, and Ms. Dugan said it, is because she was dating Charlie Adelson while he contracted Sigfredo Garcia to kill Dan Markel. Now, I get it. If you don't know these people and you're just stepping back and you're looking at it, the simple answer is, oh, she's the link. She must have known. I get it. Just looking at that, I get it. But if you just look at the surface, remember this from jury selection, and don't look at it from all angles, Catherine is the easy answer. She is the link. She's the reason these two worlds collided. But just because she is the reason that both of them know each other, it doesn't make her guilty of murder. Charles Adelson met Catherine in late 2013 when he walked into a dental office in South Florida. She was working at the front desk, and he was a periodontist who would travel to South Florida to perform his specialty at different offices located across 3 counties, Broward, West Palm Beach, and Miami. Now, McBanwa at the time had recently broken up with her longtime boyfriend. You heard about him, Sigfredo Garcia. He is the father of her children. And a few months before Charles Adelson walked into her life, she had ended things with Sigfredo. They had been together for 10 years. All of the witnesses, the state's own witnesses, are going to tell you that they were constantly breaking up and getting back together. And the source of their relationship problems was Sigfredo Garcia. He just could not stay away from temptation. Cocaine, alcohol, and girls. And in Miami, there's an unlimited supply of all 3. And Katie did not stand for that around her children. That lifestyle, no. She had 2 young kids. She had had enough. So finally, she kicked him out the house. For her kids, ended it. It was over. All of the state's witnesses are going to tell you that. They were not together. 4 months later, Charles Adelson walks into her job and immediately asks for her number. And he puts the charm on. And he starts pressuring her and asking her, calling her, gets her number from somebody else so that they can go on a date. And for Katie, who's newly single, who hasn't been with anybody else for the past 10 years, this is perfect. A nice little distraction. I've got 2 small kids, so I don't have that much time on my hands. And this is just a single bachelor who does not looking for anything serious. So this was perfect for Katie. And you're going to hear something about Charles Adelson. When he wants something, especially when it comes to the ladies, he will charm and talk his way into getting whatever he wants. And he loves to talk. You're going to hear it for yourself. He literally can't shut up. And the state's witnesses will tell you, you will hear that, yes, the evidence will show you that Charles Adelson has been described as a master manipulator, someone who uses people to get what he wants, even without them knowing. Now, The other evidence that you're going to hear in this case, which is the most important, is you're going to hear that at the time, right before the homicide, Sigfredo Garcia was actually stalking Katie. He knew she was dating a dentist. All of the friends knew that. Oh, she's dating somebody from her job, and he was not happy about that. The state's witnesses themselves are going to tell you that he would wait outside Katie's house and watch as she got into cars and go on dates without her knowing. And Charles knew all about Katie's father of her kids, Tuto, Sigfredo Tuto Garcia, because she complained to him all the time that Sigfredo couldn't get his act together. He was always on drugs and wouldn't help with the kids. And she also knew that he had some very unsavory friends in his life. Charles knew all of this. So this is where it gets important, members of the jury. And you will see that this timeline is exactly what happened in this case. February 14th, 2014, Valentine's Day, Dan Markel files a motion for protective order against Donna Adelson, requesting that she not be allowed to have unsupervised contact with his sons. This, of course, devastates Donna and Wendy. The court set the hearing for May 15th. A month later, it just so happens, Sigfredo Garcia follows Katie when she leaves her apartment to meet Charles for dinner. He was watching them as they sat outside a restaurant having dinner, and she had no idea that Sigfredo was watching. Katie then left to go home because she has kids to take care of. And Charles leaves South Beach to now drive up to his Fort Lauderdale home in his, not black Lexus, burgundy Lexus. This is when Sigfredo Garcia confronted Charles about Katie. And for Charles, an opportunity had now fallen directly into his lap. You want her back, Katie? No problem. I'll give you $100,000 in cash, and I'll leave her alone if you do this for me. God only knows what Charles Adelson told Sigfredo Garcia about Dan Markel. He probably even said to him, or you could get someone to do this for me. The deal was hatched in that moment. And just so you know, the state and the FBI were able to get a copy of Charles Adelson's iCloud account in this case from the year 2012, I believe, all the way up to 2016. And I am talking about every text message, every instant message, every WhatsApp message, even the conversations that he tried to delete. It's all there. So the very next morning, after Charles and Sigfredo have met the night before, what does Charles do? Because this is how he is and he needs to cover all his bases. He actually reaches out to Katie to check if Sigfredo has told her about what happened the night before. And the texts are going to show you she had no clue. She was even confused about why he was asking her about this. Then in April, less than a month before the court date, remember the court date is May 15th, and right around the time of Wendy Adelson's birthday, Sigfredo slips up and he leaves his phone unattended while he is visiting Katie and the kids. Katie goes through his phone and actually sees Charlie's cell phone number in one of Sigfredo Garcia's phone. You're going to hear that Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera both had multiple phones. The phones that they have the call detail records for, and burner phones, which are phones that you cannot track. What does Katie do when she sees Charles Adelson's phone number inside her ex-boyfriend's phone? Did Tuto call your phone? It's right there in black and white. Then she says, no, I'm serious. Is your cell phone number online? And what does Charles Adelson do to her? He lies to her. He says, no. In May, less than a week before the hearing on the motion, Wendy Adelson substitutes her counsel on the hearing. What does that cause? A delay. So now that hearing date, which was right there, has now been moved to August 7th. Charles has only a few months now to make sure that the job is done. The evidence is actually going to show you that in the June trip, it was only Luis Rivera who traveled up to Tallahassee, no Sigfredo Garcia, on his own to do the scouting trip. And something spooked him because the homicide didn't happen, and he comes back down to Miami. Then on July 1st, about 2 weeks before the murder, Sigfredo does it again, and he stalks Katie as she is going out on a date with Charlie. And I'm not just telling you this. This is the evidence that is coming from the state's own witnesses. And Sigfredo, when he sees that Charlie is still with Katie, he is pissed. So what does he do as they're trying to drive off in the burgundy Lexus to go on their date? Sigfredo Garcia cuts them off, jumps out of the vehicle, and runs up and tries to confront Charles. Charles doesn't even roll down the window. He just backs up and tries to get out of there. He's terrified of Sigfredo. And what does Sigfredo Garcia do? Sigfredo Garcia directly calls the Adelsons. There is no question in that. They like to say that Miss McVanway is the only link. She is not. Sigfredo Garcia, there is a phone call that he calls directly, no conduit, no in between, the Adelsons. And why that phone call is so important? Because that is the phone call that cracked the case for Tallahassee Police Department. When they did the tower dump, when Dan Markel was murdered, that's the number that came up. So what they did is they go and look at the Adelsons' phone numbers and go, wait a second, why is this phone number around the time of the murder on the Adelsons' phone records? This has nothing to do with Katie, Sigfredo and the Adelsons. 2 weeks later, after that incident, 2 weeks, Dan Markel is murdered in his driveway by Luis Rivera and Sigfredo Garcia, less than a month before the scheduled court date. Luis Rivera and Sigfredo Garcia are paid by Charles in cash. I know Ms. Dugan is going to came up here in opening and says, there's going to be evidence that you went to Charles's house and that she's the one that did. It's all speculation and inference. Nothing directly proves that. When they say the evidence is going to show that Ms. Magbanua drove up the night before, what she fails to tell you is it shows that she's driving up north and then her phone dies. And you know who else lives up north? Near Charles Adelson? Her entire family. They want you to speculate that that is where she went. Then they want you to speculate the next day. The only person that is going to say that she delivered money, the only person they're going to bring, Luis Rivera. That's the only evidence. Now, you also need to look, I know they mentioned the spike in the money. Right after Charles gives Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera the cash, they get the cash now, right? What do they both do? Luis Rivera, Sigfredo Garcia, they buy their toys, you know, some bikes and some cars. But Luis gives his money to his mom, to his sister, to his girlfriend. None of them have been arrested. And they will all tell you they didn't ask. I don't want to know where the money came from. I just took it. You are also going to say that Sigfredo, who finally had some money that he could now show the mother of his kids that I'm just not a deadbeat dad, I can help you out, gives her cash. And what does Katie do? Walks into the bank and deposits the cash with all the cameras, all the records, evidence, walks up there and deposits it into her checking account and her saving account. She is the only one that does that. There's no money with Charles Adelson being withdrawn from any of his accounts. There's no money on Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera's side depositing money. The only one who walked into the bank and deposited it was Miss Magbanua, because she had no idea that it came from the proceeds of a homicide. The next thing, and I was actually hoping, a little part of me was hoping. You know, we spoke in jury selection about how the justice system is broken and all of that. And, you know, certain things are put into place so that you as jurors can be ensured that you're hearing everything, right? The government has a duty. They have a duty and a burden to present evidence to you. Not just some of the evidence, but all of the evidence. So I was hoping that when Ms. Dugan came up here and tried to present the facts of her case, that she was going to tell you everything, not just the little things that sound and fit with their case. For example, the cash. Ms. Dugan failed to mention that Ms. Magbanua held several jobs, several cash-paying jobs. She worked in the service industry. Their own witnesses told them that. This is not something that we came up with. You're going to hear that in 2016, when the FBI and Tallahassee Police Department were investigating this case right before Ms. Magbanua was arrested, they received information from one of the witnesses that said, Ms. Magbanua used to work at this club and also worked at this club, and she received cash payments. Do you know that the FBI and the Tallahassee Police Department waited until 2021, in the middle of the pandemic, to try to go to these clubs and get the records when they were closed? So now, no records. You're also going to hear that she held several other jobs. She worked in a dermatologist's office because she is a single mother trying to take care of her own kids. This is all of their witnesses that are going to tell you that. So whereby they come in here and say there's this unusual spike of cash in her accounts, there is a legitimate explanation for every one of them. They are also going to present to you in this case the testimony of financial analyst Mary Hall. What you are going to find out from her is she's given sworn testimony in this case many times before, and every single time we come back and find out she's made a mistake. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that this money came from this source. My bad. That's their financial expert, who they're going to present to you to try and argue that this is somehow evidence that she received money from a homicide. I didn't even have these other things that I was going to address in my opening, but since Ms. Dugan brought them up, I want to make sure you all have the entire story about the facts, because when they present it the way that they do, it looks bad. I get it. I would think the same thing too, but that's because you don't have all the pieces to the puzzle. So for example, payroll. The evidence is that Charles Adelson, they actually have all of the text messages where Catherine asks him to put her on the payroll because she needs to have record of evidence so that she can qualify for Medicare. It's literally there in black and white that this is why she did it. She was getting paid a couple $100 every 2 weeks. The state also has recordings that prove that she worked there, but Ms. Dugan never mentioned anything about that. They're just going to leave that out. The Lexus, the burgundy Lexus that they're trying to say was payment for a murder, she paid for it. You know how they know? There are recordings of her talking about that. There's also paperwork that shows how much she paid for the Lexus. You're going to also see from the iCloud that this is something that Charles Adelson does. One of his other friends is going to get up here and say, oh, he sold me a Range Rover. That's what he does. He acquires cars. He has all these little things that are going on at the same time to try and, you know, scam systems to get money. That's who this guy is, even though he's a dentist. The other thing, and which is most offensive, the breast augmentation. She had that surgery after she broke up with Charles Adelson. She has been saving up to have that surgery since she was in high school. All of their witnesses are going to say that this is what she wanted. Then they're going to tell you, oh, that there's some inference that Charles Adelson paid for it. No, they actually went and subpoenaed the doctor's records before she was even arrested. Turned out, Catherine paid for it. Every single time they do or make some accusation or attach some form of guilt to her actions, it turns out just to be the opposite. The last thing, the wiretap phone calls, okay? Now, that was a very long, convoluted thing that the state gossip hearing was trying to tell you, that you need to assume that this person is doing this and that's what this means. That wipe all of that from your mind, members of the jury. What Miss Dugan believes Charles Adelson is thinking, or what he meant to say, or what they believe Catherine is doing, is not her place to tell you. I want you to listen to the recordings for yourself. That's what I'm asking you to do. Listen to it for yourself. Use your ears. Don't have the state attorney's office trying to tell you what it is they believe is going on. Because when you actually hear the wiretaps, you are going to see that the only person who sounds like she has no idea what's going on is Miss McDonald. The only person who makes any attempt or suggestion to call the FBI, not an attempt, but she's screaming at Charles Adelson to call the FBI because she can't call the cops because someone threatened her friend's mom. They'd hang up on her. She tells, call the FBI, and he, on the phone, you're gonna hear him, no, Katie, we just have to kind of find out who this is. You are gonna hear the master manipulator at work, because that's what he does. Now, what is most important, they are only going to play certain calls to you. There are over 400 phone calls, and they are gonna cherry pick the ones that they think are relevant to their case. And those are gonna be the only ones you hear, okay? Now, they also said that they did this undercover covert operation with the guy walking up to Donna and saying Catherine's name. Now, I know Miss Dugan once again comes up here and she's talking to you about the Dolce Vita meeting in the restaurant. And yes, that sounds bad, right? Sounds bad. Oh, they meet and they start talking about all these things. Everything Miss Dugan said about how that conversation went is incorrect. She does take certain quotes that you can hear, but what she doesn't tell you is that meeting was over an hour long. The entire first half an hour of that conversation, for some reason, their expert can't clarify it. They have been trying to clarify this recording for 6 years. And a month ago, a month before Miss McDonald's trial, up comes this clarification. I was excited. I was like, okay, great. You're gonna finally see that she's innocent. But what? You cannot hear a word Miss McDonald is saying. So she could be saying, why are the cops would be looking at you? We don't know. She could be asking all these questions. We have no idea. Why their expert couldn't amplify her voice? I mean, I'm sure he's gonna tell you something, but all you're going to know is that you are going to be hearing a conversation that leaves you with more of a question mark than answers. You're actually gonna hear Charles Adelson trying to convince Catherine, I need you to call because they said your name. That's why I need you to call. He gives all these scenarios. You'll hear on this is how he operates because he's a master manipulator. You will hear the things that he says aren't the conversation of two people in the know. That conversation is Charles Adelson using Catherine McDonald as a pawn to go in to try and find out for him who these people are. He's guilty, but he has no problem sending her in because he knows she has nothing to do with it. And he has to convince her because Casey's like, why are you asking me to do? And you'll hear him. You will hear these weird scenarios. So as much as the state would like to think he's talking about this murder, he's not. He is. You'll hear one thing that's important. You never hear the word murder. You never hear the word Tallahassee. You never hear the word Wendy Adelson. You never hear Dan Markel. None of those words you hear because he's not talking to her about it. And members of the jury, what is even more concerning is the thing that you are going to find, and we talked about this in jury selection. When they did this covert operation, at the time, they knew who all the players were. They were ready. They had probable cause at that point to already arrest Garcia. Because remember, Garcia's out, Luis Rivera is in federal custody. You think they would have tapped Sigfredo Garcia's phone, right? No, we'll never know what he said on his phone. You think they'd tap Donna Adelson's phone? No, we're not going to tap hers. We're not going to listen. So they only tapped Charles Adelson's phone and Casey's phone. And then check this out. You'd think that they recorded all the conversations, right? All of them, so that you guys would have a nice, clear view and can determine for yourself what went on. No. That also goes through the lens of the police department, which they determine what would be relevant and what would not be relevant. You see, when Ms. Dugan got up here and said, oh, Donna Adelson said an ex-girlfriend called and that the first person he called was Catherine, that's not true. We had to get Charles Adelson's, the defense had to get Charles Adelson's call detail records because for some reason the state and the FBI didn't get them. When we looked at the records, he made 3 other phone calls before he called Katie. So when you take a look at the evidence, the black and white evidence in front of you, members of the jury, you're going to see it isn't what the state is trying to present you to make it seem this way. Now, what is also very important and telling in this case is about a month after the murder is committed, Charles Adelson breaks up with Catherine McManus, the girl that he supposedly conspired with to commit a murder, and she was not happy about it. He just ghosts her. You can see in the communications every day, communicate, and it is strange. After the murder, it is ghost town. The communications kind of start dwindling. You can see that the person who's trying to maintain the contact is Catherine, but he's kind of, oh, I'm busy. He starts dating other girls, and he gives her the brush off, eventually telling her, you know, you have too much baggage, so I can't be with you anymore. And what does that do, members of the jury? Open the door, the paved way for Sigfredo Garcia to make an attempt to return to Catherine's life. And it's so sad, members of the jury, because in this case, what we have here is Charlie Adelson getting what he wanted, Sigfredo Garcia getting what he wanted, and more importantly, Wendy Adelson got what she wanted. Less than 4 days after he was murdered, she packed up her stuff and left Tallahassee. You're not going to hear any evidence that Charles Adelson made any attempt to go to the funeral of his former boyfriend. He stayed in Miami and went to the gym. You are not going to see any communications on his iCloud talking about how awful this is. None of that. That is going to scream to you the person who Charles Adelson is. The type of person that would involve someone who has nothing to do with anything for his own benefit. Now, with all that said, and no direct evidence proving that she actually knew or helped kill Dan Markel, I'm sure you're asking, then why are we here then? If you're telling me that all of this evidence doesn't directly prove that she's guilty, then how did we end up in a courtroom? Members of the jury, that's why you guys are here, and this is why the Constitution put 12 or 14 people in this box for you to listen to the evidence objectively. That's what we're asking you to do. The evidence is actually going to show you that once law enforcement found this link, this common link between these two groups of people, they were the ones that made a very, very grave mistake. Instead of presuming Katie innocent, they assumed that she was guilty. And every action that they took to gather evidence after that was with the sole purpose of only finding evidence of guilt and ignoring every piece of evidence that proved that she was innocent. The wiretaps, they followed her around. They had a pole camera outside of her house. Listened to every call, everything. This was over a couple of months. They got everything that they could. And you will see to this very day, members of the jury, they do not have one piece of direct evidence, not one, that says that she knew. The only evidence that they have of that is Luis Rivera. Now I know state got up here and said, oh, we cut a deal. What is more concerning is that the state got up here and made it seem like they interviewed Luis Rivera and then went back to check if what he said is true. That's not what happened. Actually, that's how you're supposed to do it, but that's not what happened in this case. He had all of the evidence, the call detail records, their theory, their entire timeline, where it says Katie is in the middle. So he knew what they wanted to hear. After all of that is when he tells them his story. And members of the jury, I wish I could stand up here today and tell you what I think he's going to say on this witness stand, but he has changed his story so many times, and the evidence proves that he is lying. I can't even predict what he is going to tell you on the witness stand today. It's probably going to, who knows what facts he's going to add this time. But the thing that's most important is the only thing that is any kind of direct evidence are just his words. He's actually going to tell you that I heard Katie on the phone talking to Sigfredo. That's it. That's the only direct evidence, because without that, they couldn't even make an arrest against Miss McManus. What you are also going to find is Luis Rivera, the lifelong convicted gang member murderer, is their star witness. And the deal that they gave him is what you all should be paying attention to, because anybody would say anything to get this deal. He was charged with the death penalty, and the state offered him 19 years, 19, in prison for the murder of Dan Markel. But wait, that might sound like a lot, right? Maybe not enough, but sounds like a lot? No. Luis Rivera was already serving a 12-year sentence in federal custody, and the state arranged for him to serve his 19 years alongside the 12. So he's serving both sentences at the same time, and get this, in a federal detention facility, not a state prison. We all know the difference between federal detention facilities and state-run facilities. He's in Club Fed. No probation afterwards. Literally 7 years on top of this 12-year sentence. He'll probably be released, if not this decade, at the beginning. And it wasn't until he said, I heard Catherine on the phone, that's the only piece of direct evidence, that they were able to make an arrest against Miss McManus. Now, members of the jury, It's going to be a lot of evidence. Please do not get overwhelmed. It's going to be witness after witness after witness. And it's going to be a lot. It's going to be lots of phone records, lots of photographs, because this investigation spanned years before any arrests were made. Well, since 3 arrests were made. Because if you'll see, in 2016, Garcia and Rivera were arrested. In 2016, Miss McDaniel was arrested. I'm sure you're all wondering what's going on with the Adelsons, right? Donna, she's probably at home watching TV, probably watching this trial. Charles Adelson, arrested a month ago. A month ago. His lawyer is in here right now, back there, watching, taking notes, preparing for whenever Charlie's going to go to trial. Wendy Adelson, the state is going to give her immunity to come and testify in this case for them. That's what's going on in this courtroom, members of the jury. Wendy Adelson is going to get immunity to testify against Catherine McDaniel. You're going to see her for yourself. Watch her, members of the jury, because she thinks she's going to be able to put on a fantastic performance, but that's all it's going to be, is a performance. Because what you are going to see is not only does she have a motive to protect her family, including her brother, who is now arrested, but she also has a motive to protect herself. All I ask of you, member of the jury, please, any preconceived notions about what you think you know about this case, leave it at the door. Clean slate. There is a reason why the framers of the Constitution put you guys here, so that you would have the final say and not have members of the government decide whether or not you can take away someone's freedom. It can all be left in the hands of the citizens so that they can make a collective decision if this grave punishment needs to be put on another person, another citizen, because Catherine McDaniel is a citizen also of the state of Florida. And as we discussed, their job isn't only to punish guilty people, members of the jury, it is to protect the innocent. And I implore and I beg you, please, just don't get overwhelmed. Just sit down and listen to what comes out of that witness stand. And I guarantee you at the end of this case, you will see clear as day that Ms. McDaniel did not know and that she is innocent of these charges. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Quaz. Okay, we're going to take a short break.
Well, I put her, she is not that fast of a talker. I had her on 1.25 because I started with the first one and oh my gracious alive, it was like slow. So that kind of gives you an idea. Let me pull. Let's see. Oh, it's the same thing. Hold on. Hold tight, hold tight. That's the retrial. Let me see if there's, so because she was what did I just do to my screen? Oh, there it is. Okay. She had a trial and then a retrial. Let me find. Let's see. All right. All right, let's see. Okay, there's tomorrow we're gonna watch the other, like the other people who took the stand. We're gonna watch their stuff tomorrow, but I wanted to pull the from Luis Rivera and Catherine, and we're gonna hear Wendy Adelson, the ex-wife. Okay, here we go. This is Sigfredo. This is his attorney's opening statement.
Counsel for the government.
And we're going to keep it in 1.25 speed. This one's not long at all, but I still like 1.25 speed. It's boosted so much. Like it's their stuff is just so low. Okay, here we go.
Counsel for the co-defendant, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. 7 years. 7 years in Florida State Prison. That's what Luis Rivera got in exchange for his participation in a first-degree murder case. And who gave him a 7-year deal offer? The prosecution. So you have to think and you have to ask yourself, what did the prosecution get in return for the deal of the century? What did the prosecution get for giving a defendant with an extremely long criminal history, including a recent federal conviction for racketeering as a Latin king? What did he give? Did he give the information of a mob boss or a drug kingpin?
There's one simple...
Whoa. That scared the bejesus out of me. Am I not logged in? Oh, I'm not logged in. Scared me. Oh, shoot. I don't know my password. Oh, I got it right. I have to confirm whether it's me. Talk amongst yourselves.
Counsel for the government, counsel for the code.
Okay, I was like, I shouldn't be having commercials. Let me see if the other feeds have... oh, hold on, I'm missing something. Patches, member for 5 months. My, how time flies. It really, I love the fly emoji, actually. That's awesome. Time does fly, doesn't it? It really does. It goes by so fast. Happy anniversary. Happy anniversary. Let's see. It's our anniversary. Oh, here we go. Okay, wait. Well, this one might have better.
We'll start with the state of Florida.
May it please the court. Counsel. Members of the jury, good morning.
So this is the
evidence in this case will show that at 11 a.m. on July 18th, 2014, Jim Geiger is with his wife and grandchildren at his home on Trescott Drive when he hears a noise that sounds like a gunshot. He goes to a large bay window at the front of his residence and looks outside toward his neighbor's house. and he observes what appears to be a light-colored Prius or Prius-type vehicle back quickly out of his neighbor's driveway and take off toward Benton Road. Concerned, Mr. Geiger walks out his front door and walks in the direction of his neighbor's residence. His neighbor is Dan Markel. Seeing that Mr. Markel's vehicle is running in the garage, he's thinking, well, maybe Mr. Markel's about to back out. So he kind of goes back to his house, but he kind of keeps an eye on the driveway. When Mr. Markel does not back out after a couple moments, Mr. Geiger goes over to do some further investigation. And that is when he sees a terrible sight. His neighbor, Dan Markel, behind the wheel with a terrible wound to his head. There is shattered glass everywhere. Mr. Markel is seated in the driver's seat. He's alive, he's moving, he's still groaning, but he's not able to talk. He's not responsive, and he's obviously in distress. Mr. Geiger, seeing this, runs home for his phone and calls 911. That call came in at 11:01 a.m. in broad daylight. First responders arrived to find 41-year-old Dan Markel unresponsive. He's taken to the hospital where he survives for some time, I think about 14 hours before he is officially pronounced deceased. Dan Markel, father of 2 young boys and highly respected attorney at law and professor at the Florida State University College of Law, was shot twice in the head in his own garage in broad daylight. Who would do such a thing? Nothing seems to be missing from the crime scene. There's no sign of a forced entry or a robbery attempt. How do you begin to investigate a case like this? What clues did the killers leave behind? Well, thanks to our 911 caller, we know that the suspect vehicle is a light-colored Prius. And there's a second 911 call as well. You'll learn that Mr. Markel was on the phone at the time he was murdered, and the person that he was on the phone with heard Markel say, "Hold on a moment, there's someone in my driveway I don't recognize." Then the line went dead, and the man was unable to reach Mr. Markel again, so he called 911. So we learned from that the person that murdered Mr. Markel was a stranger to him. It was someone he did not recognize. An inquiry into Dan Markel's movements that morning revealed that he dropped his 2 young sons off at daycare at about 8:50 a.m., then went to work out at Premier Gym, and then was killed shortly upon his return home from the gym. Law enforcement obtained surveillance from the gym and later surveillance from a city bus. So there are cameras mounted to city buses, and they got surveillance from the city buses along the route that they think this Prius might have traveled, along the route that they think Mr. Markel would have traveled between the gym and his residence.
Happy anniversary.
And they discovered something ominous on this surveillance footage. A light-colored Prius, which they deduced from this surveillance was silver pine mica, that's the exact color, which appears to follow Dan Markel into the gym parking lot at 9:11 a.m. on the morning of his death. The Prius waits in the parking lot for Mr. Markel to work out, which is approximately an hour. And then the Prius follows Mr. Markel out of the parking lot at about 10:38 a.m. The Prius was also observed on a surveillance camera from the city bus, which narrows the time of Mr. Markel's death even further, because we see that Prius on a bus both minutes before, and then moments after the murder as well, fleeing at a high rate of speed north on Thomasville Road towards the interstate. And you will observe these surveillance videos and learn a few things from these images that were captured about our suspect vehicle. You'll learn the exact color of the Prius, silver pine mica, the approximate year of the vehicle, the fact that the vehicle had a black aftermarket side mirror attached to it, a missing tow hook cover, which is just a little round circle on the front bumper of the vehicle, and a SunPass transponder mounted to the front of the windshield. Also, in one of the images from the city bus captured after the murder, you will see the presence of what appears to be a driver in a dark-colored shirt and a passenger in a light-colored shirt. That becomes important because later, when we have 2 suspects develop, we find an ATM video that shows in Pembroke Pines, Florida, on the same day of the murder, a silver pine mica Prius at an ATM with our 2 suspects pictured inside, and you'll see those images as well. So meanwhile, law enforcement's gathering these surveillance images, trying to get information about the suspects and the vehicle that might be involved in this murder. While they're doing that, they're simultaneously trying to learn more about Dan Markel's life, who is close to him, who might have a motive to want him dead. Law enforcement meets with Markel's ex-wife, Wendy Adelson, whereby they learn that she has been embroiled in a very contentious divorce and continued litigation with Mr. Markel regarding the enforcement of the divorce.
Oh, this is what I hate about Chrome.
Settlement agreement, and specifically the custody of their 2 boys. Pleadings from the divorce indicate that Wendy Adelson had made efforts to relocate to South Florida. She'd actually moved to South Florida with the kids, and a court ordered her on June 20th, 2013, that she had to come back to Tallahassee. She couldn't leave with Mr. Markel's children. Emails between Wendy Adelson's life.
Hold on, let me, hold please. I'm swapping browsers. I forgot, I've opened Chrome because it was open right here, but I forgot Chrome does that thing where it has to think about everything. Ain't nobody got time for that.
Emails between Wendy Adelson and her mother, Donna Adelson, that occur around the time of this litigation, about 1 year before the murder, indicate that Donna Adelson despised Dan Markel and was desperate to find a way for Wendy and these two kids to move down to where she was located in South Florida. Donna Adelson in these emails refers to Dan Markel as a religious zealot, a bastard. She says, let's show this F blank, 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 what will make him absolutely miserable, and proposes a plan of action for how to threaten and or bully and or bribe Dan Markel into allowing Wendy to move to South Florida with the children. These plans included converting the children to Catholicism, even though the entire family was Jewish. All the Adelsons were Jewish as well. But this suggestion was a way to gain leverage against Mr. Markel because Dan Markel was very observant in his faith, and it was very important to him that his children be raised in an environment that observed and was committed to the Jewish faith. The divorce between Wendy and Dan Markel was final back on July 31st of 2013, but as I mentioned, the litigation continued as both sides filed pleadings back and forth in reference to alleged violations of the divorce agreement, in reference to child custody, and specifically one of the last pleadings filed prior to Dan Markel's murder is in reference to Wendy Adelson's mother, his mother-in-law, Donna Adelson. And
look, y'all notice we're going to hear Donna's name a lot, which is why I said they just had the thing a few days ago where we found out that her and Harvey are going to have to come answer questions.
In this pleading, he alleged that the children's grandmother, Donna Adelson, was disparaging him to the kids, and he was petitioning the court to order that Donna Adelson not be allowed to have unsupervised contact with his children, her grandchildren. A ruling was never made on that motion because Dan Markel was murdered before the hearing was conducted. Wendy Adelson was interviewed, as I mentioned, and she will tell you that she sure hopes someone didn't do this on her behalf. She will tell you that her brother, Charlie Adelson, who also lives in South Florida with her mother, not with, but in the same area as her mother, Donna Adelson, and her father, Harvey Adelson. She'll tell you that Charlie, quote, looked into hiring a hitman, but decided buying her a TV as a divorce present would be cheaper. And what was her alibi for the murder? Where was she when Dan Markel was killed?
She's got her FSU
She
cup.
has a witness who was present at her home, a repairman who was fixing that very TV. An appointment that was set up by her mother, Donna Adelson. So Wendy's brother, Charlie Adelson, has made references to hiring a hitman to kill Dan Markel, and now hitmen have murdered Dan Markel. Meanwhile, law enforcement is still putting together more information about the Prius and the killers. They have gotten a search warrant for all the phone numbers that interacted with the cell tower, consistent with people being in the area of Premier Gym at the time that we know they were there. So literally every cell phone that interacted with those towers during that hour period of time. And they cross-referenced all of that data with Mr. Markel and his in-laws. So basically have any of the phone numbers that appear on that tower around the time that we know the suspects were at the gym been in contact recently with Dan Markel or with his in-laws or with his ex-wife. The purpose of that was to try to see if there was any link there. And combing through all this data and putting it all together was a very tedious task, but they did find one number with a South Florida exchange, which was present both in the area of Premier Gym at the time that the killers were there, and was linked to a single phone call on July 1st, 2014, so about 17 days before the murder. This number that was at Premier Gym from South Florida contacted Harvey Adelson, so the father-in-law of the deceased, husband of Donna Adelson, father of Wendy Adelson. And that number that contacted Harvey Adelson and that was also present at the gym on our date in question belonged to Sigfredo Garcia, the defendant in this case, aka Tuto, T-U-T-O.
It's a lot.
An examination of Garcia's call logs showed a frequent contact with another number, which also was present on our what we're calling tower dumps. So all those numbers that interacted with that cell phone tower at Premier at that time. Another number, no connection with the Adelsons that we found, but a frequent caller of Sigfredo Garcia is Luis Rivera. That phone number was also present at Premier at the time that our suspect vehicle was there. Luis Rivera's AKA is Tato. So we've got Tuto and Tato. So why would these two guys, Tuto and Tato, with no apparent ties to Tallahassee, be all the way up here from Miami, hanging around the gym at the same time that our suspect Prius was there? Possibly because they're our suspects. They're the ones inside the Prius. So now that we have these suspect phone numbers, we subpoena all the location information from the cell phone providers to show information about Rivera and Garcia's phones. Where were they during the time leading up to the homicide and after the homicide and at the time of the homicide? And what it shows, which you'll get detailed testimony about in the form of digital evidence, is that Rivera and Garcia's phones leave Miami on July 16th, 2014. You'll see their movements up from Miami to Tallahassee. You'll see their movements around Tallahassee, including being in the area of Premier Gym. And then you'll see that both phones are consistent with having been turned off around the time that the Prius was at Premier Gym waiting for Dan Markel to come out. And both phones remain inactive until about an hour after the murder, where they pop back up, headed southbound on the interstate toward Miami. As a result of this evidence, Luis Rivera and Sigfredo Garcia were charged with first-degree murder of Dan Markel. The police work that has just taken me a few minutes to summarize took about 2 years to accomplish. By the time Rivera and Garcia were arrested for this murder, Rivera was in custody on an unrelated federal racketeering charge, which concerned Rivera's affiliation with a criminal street gang. So when we developed these suspects, Rivera's in custody on something else. Ultimately, the state made a deal with Rivera to tell the truth in exchange for a plea to second-degree murder and a 19-year prison sentence to run concurrent or at the same time as his federal sentence. Rivera will tell you that he was hired by his lifelong friend, Sigfredo Garcia, who was hired by his longtime girlfriend and children's mother, Catherine Magbanowa, aka Katie, to come to Tallahassee and to kill Dan Markel. Magbanowa had an on-again, off-again relationship with Mr. Garcia, and during one of the off-again periods, you will learn prior to the murder, during one of these off-again periods with Mr. Garcia, she was seeing somebody else, a wealthy dentist by the name of Charlie Adelson. Charlie Adelson had a sister in Tallahassee, Wendy Adelson, and Wendy Adelson had a problem, and her problem was named Dan Markel. And the solution to that problem was Magbanowa, Rivera, and Garcia. Garcia told Rivera that Catherine Magbanowa had gotten them a job, and it was a big one. It was going to pay a lot of money. The job was in Tallahassee. Rivera and Garcia made, you'll learn, not one, but 2 trips to Tallahassee. The first trip was about 6 weeks prior to Markel's death, and it was intended to be a murder trip, but it ended up being more of a scouting trip. The murder did not occur. Garcia told Rivera on the way to Tallahassee on that first trip that they were coming up here to do a murder. Garcia showed Mr. Rivera a photograph of who they were coming to kill. He had a piece of paper with a picture of Dan Markel on it and some typed words underneath. He indicated to Rivera that they needed to kill this guy so that his wife could get their kids, and that they were going to be paid $100,000 for the job, with Rivera's cut being $35,000. Rivera bought a gun off the street, and Garcia rented a car for this June trip. Rivera asked Garcia, and this is the first trip, Rivera asked Garcia who knew that he was going along, who knew he was involved. And Garcia assured him that only Katie knew, Catherine Magbanua. On the way, Garcia showed Rivera the piece of paper, and Rivera also overheard several phone calls between Garcia and Magbanua during this first trip, which included Magbanua instructing Garcia about what they needed to do, including things like, make sure you do everything right. Don't do anything stupid. When you are done, call me. Garcia and Rivera got a hotel room here in Tallahassee on this first trip. They did some scouting around the Markel residence, but couldn't get the job done, and ultimately headed back to Miami. 6 weeks later, the 2 returned to Tallahassee in the green Prius rented by Luis Rivera in Miami, Florida. They brought the same gun that was present on the first trip, the one that Luis Rivera bought off the street, and that ultimately becomes the murder weapon. On this trip, they spend 2 nights in Tallahassee, again scouting around the Markel residence, attempting to follow Mr. Markel, and you'll hear Catherine Magbanua previously instructed them not to do anything stupid. And that will be, her reasoning for that will be evidenced by some of the activity that they get up to when they're here. For example, Garcia accidentally shot a hole in the floorboard on the passenger side of the Prius with the murder weapon prior to the murder, which resulted in them severing the gas line and rendering the vehicle inoperable. Then they had to get a ride to the store to buy some supplies to fix the thing and fix the thing on the side of the road. So you'll hear a little bit about that. Then, the night before the murder, Rivera will tell you that he took a picture of an owl and posted it on Instagram, which, as y'all may know, indicates where you are when you post something. And he'll tell you that Catherine Magbanua immediately called Garcia to tell Rivera how stupid he was and to take the picture down because nobody could know where he was. Again, Rivera overhears conversation during the second trip between Garcia and Magbanua. Catherine Magbanua indicates that they have to get this job done because the professor is planning to leave town in the near future. So on July 18th, 2014, Rivera and Garcia follow Professor Markel to the daycare where he drops off his kids at approximately 8:50 in the morning. Then they go to the gym where they wait in the parking lot while Mr. Markel works out. And then they go to his home where Rivera pulls the Prius into the driveway close up to the bumper of Mr. Markel where he's parked in his driveway. You'll hear that Garcia gets out and approaches Markel with the revolver purchased on the street by Luis Rivera, and that that Garcia shoots Mr. Markel twice through the driver's window before hopping back into the Prius. Rivera backs out of the driveway and they head back to Miami. I mentioned earlier that both men had their phones off, and that once they turn their phones back on, the very first call that either of them make after the homicide is Mr. Garcia to Catherine Magbanua. And what does he say? He says, "The job is done." And what does she reply? She says, "I know." There's a brief discussion about when they'll get their money. And Catherine Magbanua says, don't worry about the money. I will get the money. You'll get it tomorrow. Then the next day, Rivera was at the barber shop when he talked to Catherine Magbanua. She advised that she had the money and was looking for Garcia to pay up, but wasn't able to find Garcia. Rivera knew where to look for Garcia at another young lady's residence. Rivera successfully rounds up Garcia and they all meet at Rivera's house where Rivera gets his payment. So Rivera, Garcia, and Magbanua are all present. Rivera gets his money, $35,000 stapled into packs of $1,000 apiece. Garcia also gave Rivera a little extra money later that night while they're out celebrating. In the weeks and months after the homicide, Rivera and Garcia they each bought a motorcycle. Garcia also bought a car. Catherine Magbanua also got a car, a black Lexus, whose previous owner happens to be Harvey Adelson. Magbanua was also put on the payroll at the Adelson's dental practice shortly after the homicide and began receiving regular checks for approximately 2 years, although law enforcement has yet to determine what, if anything, what if any service she provides to that dental office. And the folks that work there don't seem to know either. She got a breast augmentation surgery shortly after the homicide. She had trips paid for by Charlie Adelson after the homicide that didn't even include him. And she deposited large amounts of cash into her bank account around the time of the murder, sometimes multiple deposits at different banks in the same day. So in an effort to ferret out who are all of the members of this conspiracy, and to prove how information flowed, how was the conspiracy structured, we, on April 19th, 2016, so almost 2 years after the murder, law enforcement conducts an undercover operation. They got court authorization to go up on a wire, what's called a wire, on Catherine Magbanua's phone, and also Charlie Adelson's phone, which means they could listen in real time to what was being said on these phones. That's, despite some popular belief, not something the government normally can do without special authorization. In this case, that authorization was put in place, and law enforcement was prepared to listen to both Catherine Magbanua's calls and Charlie Adelson's calls. They then sent an undercover agent posing as someone who basically was on behalf of Rivera to walk up to Donna Adelson on the street and basically try to extort money out of her. This undercover officer handed Donna Adelson a piece of paper. And on the paper is a story about the death of Dan Markel. It includes a photograph of Dan Markel, and written on the page is a phone number and the amount $5,000. And the undercover agent, I'm summarizing, tells Donna Adelson, basically, my buddy Rivera, he didn't say the word Rivera, but my buddy's sitting in jail, and you're out here taking care of Katie and Tudo. So basically, he's asking for $5,000 for Rivera to even things out. So now law enforcement starts listening to the calls. Like, you know, we do this little thing, it's 2 years after the murder, we do this undercover operation to try to generate some chatter and see who will say what to whom. And you'll get an opportunity to hear some of those phone calls that result from this undercover operation. That phone number, the undercover agent's phone number that's written on that piece of paper that's handed to Donna Adelson, you're going to see that it travels from Donna to Charlie to Katie and then to Sigfredo. You will hear and see evidence of these calls, and you can make of them what you will. But in conclusion, I believe that you will be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that the state is not pulling a fast one on you, but rather that Catherine Magbanua was hired to solicit Garcia, who in turn solicited Rivera to come to Tallahassee and to execute Mr. Markel in cold blood. At the conclusion of the evidence, I will ask you to return a verdict of guilty as charged for both defendants. Thank you.
Just thinking it.
If it pleases the court,
Did it
counsel
swap?
for the government, counsel for the co-defendant, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. 7 years. 7 years in Florida State Prison. That's what Luis Rivera got in exchange for his participation in a first-degree murder case. And who gave him a 7-year deal offer? The prosecution. So you have to think and you have to ask yourself.
So I see both defendants. Who's the other one? So this is from 4 years ago from the trial. This had Catherine and here, where's my little picture? Catherine and Garcia. Like this was the first trial. So this is
What did the prosecution?
Sorry, this is Garcia's attorney.
Get in return for the deal of the century? What did the prosecution get for giving a defendant with an extremely long criminal history, including a recent federal conviction for racketeering as a Latin king? What did he give? Did he give the information of a mob boss or a drug kingpin, a foreign or domestic terrorist, a hiding school shooter? No. He gave up Secreto Garcia. And why does that matter? Why does what he gave up matter? Why does Luis Rivera's information in this case matter? Because as it's clear from the government's opening statement, their focus in this case is on the Adelsons. Donna Adelson, Charlie Adelson, Wendy Adelson. That's who their real targets are. And so what do? They go after the low-hanging fruit. They go to Luis Rivera, who was charged with first-degree murder and subject to the death penalty. And they tell him, we're going to cut you a deal where you only have to serve 7 more years. 7. So what does he do? He sits with his lawyer, Chuck Collins. You're gonna see a tape. You're gonna see an interview that the government's gonna play where law enforcement officers are sitting at a table with Luis Rivera and his attorney, Chuck Collins. And it's gonna be considered his initial statement, okay? And they're gonna ask him things back and forth, and you'll see that Luis Rivera gives a statement that in essence becomes the prosecution's parrot. He says pretty much everything that coincides with their strategy, with their theory of the case. What they don't tell you and what they don't show you is that before the video camera turns on, law enforcement is in one room, Luis Rivera and Chuck Collins are in another. And the detectives go not to Luis Rivera, but to Chuck Collins to exchange questions, to prepare Luis Rivera for when the lights turn on, to make sure that your story fits, that your story is in unison with what the government wants you to say. They don't show you that, but you're going to hear about it because the testimony is what it is. And the testimony is that the government spoon-fed Luis Rivera as to what his testimony has to be. Now, why does that matter? Well, let's talk about some of the things that the government said in their opening and what they believe that the evidence is going to show. They talked about an initial trip where Luis Rivera says that him and Secreto Garcia traveled from from Miami to Tallahassee to scope out the scene or to commit murder or whatever their argument was. And the reason why Luis Rivera has to say this is because there's cell tower records that show that he traveled from Miami to Tallahassee a month before the murder. There's no such records for Secreto Garcia. you won't hear one thing. You won't see one piece of data that shows Sigfredo Garcia traveled from Miami to Tallahassee during that first purported trip. And if you don't think that's good enough, there's more.
But wait, there's more.
During that first trip up, Luis Rivera, who was driving, who rented his car, he gets pulled over by a Florida Highway Patrol officer, Trooper Downing. And Trooper Downing testified, and you'll hear that his testimony is that when he issued the citation, that Luis Rivera was alone in the car. And he knows that because he indicated it on the citation. The government has hitched their wagon to Luis Rivera. That's this case, okay? There's going to be speculation and an additional theory of why the Adelsons wanted to hurt Dan Markel. That's an additional case. This case, Sigfredo's case, is premised around Luis Rivera. And I'll tell you why. Because the only person that can put Sigfredo Garcia at the scene, the only person who can tell you that Sigfredo Garcia got out of the car and purportedly shot Dan Markel is who? It's the guy who got the 7 years. The guy who got the deal of a lifetime. It's him. That's their case. You will hear statement after statement after statement from Luis Rivera, who adds and subtracts and changes and alters his testimony from A to Z. I mean, it's crazy how much he changes his story. He tells the government, which they're going to tell you, we got 100 grand for this murder. And for driving up to Tallahassee, you know what I got as the driver? I got 35 grand. So wait a minute, let me get this straight. Supposedly, Sigfredo Garcia was hired and given $100,000, and he decided, because he's such a wealthy guy, to bring you in to do nothing other than drive you up to Tallahassee twice for 35 grand. 2 and 2 has to equal 4, okay? Luis Rivera also wants you to believe that Katie Magbanua was solicited by Charlie Adelson, okay? Now, the evidence is going to show that
Wait, I have to stop this for a second. His style is so funny because it's different, because it's like the way that he talks to the jury, he's like, and let me tell you this, okay? Like it's almost like he sounds like his tone and the way he addresses them, it almost sounds like he's telling them the latest gossip, doesn't it?
my client has children with Miss Magbanua. He loves her. That's his girlfriend. That's his wifey. But they were going through a rough patch. You know who she was dating? She was dating Charlie Adelson. They want you to believe, and the evidence will show from the government's own witnesses, that Sigfredo Garcia was in love with Katie, and he was not happy, not one bit, that this dental playboy that drives around in a Ferrari with nice hair and big muscles and a long, long wallet was with his wifey. They want you to believe that this man whose heart was broken decided, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and help out the guy that's with my wife. And the evidence is going to show Charlie Adelson's, he's no numbskull. He's got degree after degree, very highly educated. Who do you think? The evidence is going to show that Charlie Adelson's a smart guy. Charlie Adelson knew Sigfredo didn't like him. Charlie Adelson also knew that crossing, when you make that decision, if you're going to solicit somebody, if you have the option of Luis Rivera, the primero of the Latin Kings. Primero Latin Kings means you're the head of the Latin Kings. If you're 5'4" and you're the head of a gang organization, what does that mean? That means you're a bad dude. You don't get to become the head of a gang at 5'4" if you don't prove yourself as a gang member. And he's not like, it's not like a fairy tale gang. This is an international organization known for its involvement in criminal acts from robbery, homicide, drug dealing, kidnapping, you name it. And how do I prove that Luis Rivera was in this criminal organization? Other than he's going to have to admit it, he was serving a federal sentence for racketeering for 12 years by the United States Department of Justice. And on that indictment, you will see that he had a network of Latin kings throughout the state of Florida. From Key West up to the Panhandle, they're Latin kings. And as the primero, which means a leader of the Latin kings, he had access to other Latin kings. So if he wanted to go up to Tallahassee to commit a murder, you think he would take a gun? No, because he's a convicted felon. He'd be riding dirty. That means he'd be riding with a gun. No, what does he do? Picks up the phone and he calls one of his brothers up north. That makes sense. That's what the head of a criminal organization would do. This is not a street level thug. This is the primero of the Latin kings. And so Luis Rivera, a known drug dealer, a known supplier of, he is a pharmacy from soup to nuts, from steroids to cocaine. He supplies them. And it's our position that he has a relationship with Charlie Adelson. It's our position that he was the drug supplier for Charlie Adelson. And Charlie Adelson made a decision to instill and to solicit this murder for hire from Luis Rivera. And do you think Luis Rivera, he took the $100,000, but do you think he's going to tell his buddy Sigfredo, hey, I'm going to help out the guy that's sleeping with your wife? The Latin kings have a code of silence. He'll tell you about it. It's known. The Latin kings are an organization that they're known to keep their mouths shut. It is in their Bible. There's been specials on HBO about it. And so Charlie Adelson, who's an educated man, instills the services of a known gang leader, not Sigfredo Garcia. But who's going to tell you otherwise? Well, let's see. The guy looking at the death penalty that the government offered him 7 years. You're going to hear discrepancy after discrepancy. You're going to hear problematic evidence with Luis Rivera about Sigfredo Garcia's involvement. And you're going to hear over and over and over that Luis Rivera's story fits the government's theory. Because the target at the end of this case is not these two. When Luis Rivera started cooperating in October of 2016, the government, as well as everybody else, believed that they would be the next to crumble to get to the Adelson. That's what everybody thought. But yet, here we are. They've maintained their innocence, and we're here in trial. We ask you guys to keep an open mind, okay? We ask you guys to evaluate the evidence. The government said in an opening statement that there's a picture of the Prius that shows two people in it. Don't listen to them. Make your own decision. Our position is that Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera were up in Tallahassee. We will admit to that. But they were there for one of many drug deals that they were involved in because Luis Rivera is a drug dealer. And he brings along Sigfredo Garcia time and time again. We will submit to you that Luis Rivera is the shooter in this case. We will submit to you that he instilled the services of his organization to supply the gun and to supply another henchman in this case. And remember, the only person that can put my client in that car, the only person that puts the gun in my client's purported hand, the only person that says Sigfredo Garcia went and killed Dan Markel is who? It's Luis Rivera.
We're going to take a break. Just a second.
It's Luis Rivera. All right, so that's the openings. We're going to end for the day because I have to get the podcast recorded. So we are going to raid RA's channel and go support him and click like and crash his party. So I'm going to redirect us over there. Tomorrow, we're we'll be a little bit longer. So tomorrow is going to be, this is like opening statements. This kind of gives you an idea of what's going to be coming up in the trials. Tomorrow, we are going to watch the testimonies from Catherine and from Garcia. So we're going to listen to them on the stand and hear what they have to say, which is really interesting. I have the stream already set for tomorrow. It'll be on there. So when you go on it, just click notify me. So it'll let you know when I go live. But right now the plan is to start, I don't remember. I think I put 10 my time. So 10 Central, 11 Eastern. That's the plan for now. But click on that stream and add or click notify me when I go live. So that way you get the notice. I saw a lot of y'all saying that you didn't get the notice when we went live today. So I appreciate it. I know today's a shorter stream, but it's like I said, y'all, it's been a chaotic week and I have to get the podcast recorded. So I'm going to cut it a little short today, go raid RA. And then tomorrow we have a lot of interesting stuff to look at to get ready for the trial next week. So hands and feet all inside so you don't get caught in the portal. And I will see y'all. I'll see you at RA's for just a minute and then I got to work. And then I'll see y'all tomorrow.